I thought staying late at work would just mean more paperwork. But that night, sitting beside her in the quiet glow of the office, something in me changed. Quietly, completely. I didn't plan to stay late that night. I just wanted to finish a few reports before the weekend, clear my desk, maybe catch the last train home in peace. But somehow, the hours slipped away, and the office emptied around me. One quiet goodbye after another, until it was just me and the hum of the ceiling lights. The world outside the windows had gone dark. Streetlights cast long streaks of gold across the glass, and in their reflection, I saw her, sitting at her desk, a few rows away. Ms. Hartman, my supervisor, the kind of woman who never seemed rushed, even when everyone else was. She had her glasses resting low on her nose, a strand of hair falling out of the twist she always wore. Her jacket was folded neatly on the back of her chair, sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal the soft shimmer of a bracelet that caught the light each time she moved her hand. I'd seen her like this before, of course, focused, composed, but never this quiet, never this human. There's a stillness that only exists after hours in an office. The air feels different, almost alive, filled with the low hum of computers cooling down, the faint clicking of keys, the distant whir of a printer that someone forgot to turn off. Every sound feels magnified, every movement amplified. When she looked up and met my eyes, it felt like I'd been caught doing something private, even though all I'd done was look. "You're still here?" she asked, her voice soft, a little surprised. I nodded. "Thought I'd finished the report tonight. Didn't expect you'd still be here either." She smiled faintly, a tired, honest kind of smile. "Deadlines don't care what time it is." Something in her tone made me pause. It wasn't the polished, professional voice I usually heard in meetings. It was warmer, gentler. A voice that belonged to someone who'd been carrying too much all day. After a moment, she gestured toward the stack of folders beside her. "Actually, could you help me sort these? Just for a minute." I hesitated, then stood, crossing the space between our desks. The faint scent of her perfume reached me first, subtle and steady, like sandalwood and clean paper. I pulled up a chair beside her, and we began sorting through the files in quiet rhythm. At one point, our fingers brushed as we reached for the same folder. It wasn't dramatic, just the briefest contact, but it made the air between us shift. My pulse caught offbeat. She didn't move away immediately, and neither did I. Then she cleared her throat softly and looked back at the papers, her cheeks carrying the faintest flush. Outside, the city lights blinked against the glass. Inside, the office felt smaller. Not in a suffocating way, but in that fragile, weightless way when two people suddenly become aware of each other's presence. That's when I realized the night wasn't over yet. It started with silence, the kind that's comfortable, almost fragile. The soft rustle of paper, the muted tapping of keys, the slow rhythm of two people working side by side. Every sound felt alive in that quiet space. I could hear the faint hum of the heater under her desk, the distant creak of the floor as the building settled for the night. She broke the silence first. "You always stay late like this?" Her tone wasn't managerial. It was light, curious, almost teasing. "Not usually," I said, glancing up from the file in my hands. "Guess I just lost track of time." Her eyes lifted from the paperwork. In the soft lamplight, I could see how tired she looked. Not in a way that dulled her, but in a way that made her real. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes, a quiet weariness that came from carrying too much responsibility for too long. "You remind me of myself a few years ago," she said, leaning back slightly in her chair, "trying too hard to prove something no one's even questioning." I smiled, though I didn't know what to say. She'd hit closer to the truth than I expected. She caught the hesitation in my silence and smiled faintly. "Don't worry. It's not a lecture. Just an observation." That's how it began. One small thread of conversation unraveling into something deeper. We talked about work at first, then about why she'd chosen this career, about the city, about how time seems to move differently when you're chasing deadlines. When I mentioned that I'd moved here only last year, she looked at me with quiet curiosity. "That must have been a big change," she said. leaving everything familiar. It was, I admitted. But sometimes change feels cleaner than staying stuck. She gave a soft, approving nod. Then, almost to herself, she murmured, "You sound younger than I am, but somehow wiser." Her words lingered longer than they should have. We fell into small silences between stories. Not awkward ones, but gentle pauses that made me more aware of every detail around her. The way her hair caught the light when she turned. The sound of her laughter, low and genuine, a little rough at the edges, like it had been hidden for too long. She laughed once, covering her mouth slightly, and said, "I'm sorry. It's strange hearing my own laugh in here. The office isn't usually this quiet." "It's a good sound," I said before I could stop myself. Her eyes lifted to mine. For a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. There was nothing flirtatious in that silence. Just the quiet recognition that something had shifted. Outside, the rain began to patter against the tall windows. Soft, steady, rhythmic. Inside, the world felt suspended between us, caught somewhere between work and something that had no name yet. She looked down again, smiling faintly. "We should probably finish this before it gets too late." But her voice had changed, softer, more thoughtful. And I knew neither of us was in any real hurry to go home, by the time the clock on the wall blinked past 9. The rain outside had turned heavier, streaks of silver sliding down the glass, distorting the city lights into something almost dreamlike. Most of the files were finally sorted, stacked neatly between us like a small accomplishment. She exhaled softly and stretched her hands above her head, rolling her shoulders. A quiet groan escaped her lips. Not dramatic, just honest fatigue. "I think I've forgotten what it feels like to finish a day before dark," she murmured, smiling faintly. I laughed, leaning back in my chair. "You make it sound like the night's your enemy." "Sometimes it is," she said. Then, after a pause, "Sometimes it's the only time I can actually breathe." The words hung in the air longer than they should have. They didn't sound like something she planned to say, more like something that slipped through the cracks of her composure. I didn't press her. I just let the silence hold it for her. After a moment, she stood and walked toward the copier near the wall, a folder in hand. I followed, out of habit more than necessity. The machine had been temperamental all week, and as she fed the paper into it, the low were suddenly sputtered and jammed. She frowned, muttered under her breath, and pressed a few buttons. "Nothing." "Let me try," I offered. She shook her head lightly. "I've got it." But when the tray refused to open, she sighed and stepped aside with a half smile. "All yours." I crouched down to unclip the latch, and she knelt beside me to help. The copier was still warm from use, humming softly. Her sleeve brushed my arm as she leaned closer, the faint warmth of her skin cutting through the chill in the air. "There," I said quietly as the paper slid free. She laughed. A small, breathy sound of relief. "You might have just saved my sanity." When she reached for the folder, her hand rested lightly on my forearm in thanks. Just a small touch, almost accidental. But it stayed there for a heartbeat longer than it needed to. Her fingers were cool, delicate. My pulse kicked hard beneath her touch, and I wondered if she felt it. She seemed to notice, because she drew her hand back gently, her expression shifting. Not embarrassed exactly, but open in a way I hadn't seen before. "Sorry," she said softly, her eyes flicking to mine. "I didn't mean to." "It's okay," I said, cutting her off, not to dismiss it, but because the moment didn't need an apology. Something unspoken settled between us, quiet but undeniable. The office didn't feel like an office anymore. It felt like a pause, like the world had exhaled and left just the two of us in its stillness. She looked down, gathering the papers, her voice barely above a whisper. "You should probably head home soon." "I will," I said, though neither of us moved. For the first time, the space between us wasn't professional. It was human, fragile, honest, and just a little bit dangerous in the way truth always is. The next morning, the office felt different. Not louder, just sharper somehow. Every sound stood out. The echo of footsteps in the hallway, the shuffle of papers, the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights. I'd walked in a little earlier than usual, coffee in hand, still replaying the quiet closeness of the night before. Her voice, her touch, the way the rain had sounded like a secret between us. She was already there, sitting at her desk with her usual composure restored. Glasses on, hair perfectly in place, her tone crisp as she greeted the team. Nothing in her demeanor hinted that anything had shifted. When her eyes met mine briefly across the room, she offered a polite nod. Professional, distant, safe. That single look felt colder than it should have. I told myself it was fine, that maybe I had imagined the connection, or at least exaggerated it in my head. But part of me knew I hadn't. Something had been real in that quiet office, something neither of us had words for yet. At lunch, I passed her near the break room. She was talking with another colleague, laughing lightly, her tone easy and composed. When I greeted her, she smiled. That same careful, public smile she gave everyone else. Shouldn't have hurt, but it did. Later that day, I caught her by the elevator. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice casual. "Do you still need help with those reports from last night?" She hesitated just long enough for me to notice. Then she shook her head lightly. "No, thank you. I've got it covered." The doors opened, and she stepped inside, offering a small, polite smile before they closed. The rest of the afternoon felt heavier. I went through the motions of work, typing, answering emails, pretending not to glance toward her office window. But every time I caught sight of her, she looked composed, focused, unreachable again. I realized then that she was drawing a line, not out of cruelty but caution, the kind of boundary that says I felt it too, but I can't afford to show it. That night, as I gathered my things, I noticed her light still on through the glass partition. She was reading a file, one hand pressed to her temple, the other resting on the desk. The sight stirred something quiet in me, a mix of admiration and ache. I wanted to step in, to ask if she was okay, to bring back that soft, human warmth from the night before. But I didn't. I just stood there for a few seconds, watching her silhouette against the lamplight, before turning off my monitor and walking out into the cool night air. The city felt bigger than usual, the streets wider, emptier. As I walked home, I caught my reflection in a darkened window. Tired, uncertain, maybe even a little foolish. Still, beneath all that, there was something else. A quiet, stubborn pull toward her. Something that hadn't faded, only hidden, waiting. It happened 3 nights later, the kind of night when the sky felt too heavy to hold itself up. The rain had returned, harder this time, blurring the streetlights into soft halos. Most of the office had already cleared out, rushing to beat the storm. I stayed behind to finish a proposal, though deep down, I think I knew why I hadn't left yet. The windows were streaked with water, the sound of rain filling the silence between keystrokes. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed softly, and then I heard her voice. "You're here again." I turned, and there she was, Ms. Hartman, though her name felt too formal for the way she looked right then. Her hair was damp at the edges, a few loose strands clinging to her temple. She held her umbrella by the handle, droplets of rain trailing down the fabric. "Couldn't leave this half done," I said, smiling lightly. "You?" She glanced toward her office. "Printer malfunction. Again." A soft laugh escaped her. "I think it waits for the rain." The sound of her laughter broke the tension that had lingered since that night. It felt almost fragile, like neither of us wanted to scare it away. When the thunder rolled overhead, we both instinctively looked toward the windows. She sighed quietly. "Guess we're stuck for a while." "I don't mind," I said before I could stop myself. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned against the edge of a desk, crossing her arms loosely. The lamplight traced soft highlights along her face, the faint curve of a smile, the tired grace in her eyes. For a long moment, we just listened to the rain. Then, in that same soft voice she'd used the first night, she said, "I've been avoiding you." The honesty in her tone caught me off guard. She didn't look away, though, her gaze stayed steady, searching. "I noticed," I admitted. "I didn't want to," she said. her voice barely above the hum of the rain. It's just, things like this can get complicated. Her words hung there, delicate and trembling. I nodded, stepping a little closer. Not enough to cross a line, but enough that she could feel I was listening. You don't have to explain, I said quietly. I get it. She looked down, then back up at me, her expression softening. You make it too easy to talk. You know that? I smiled faintly. You say that like it's a bad thing. For the first time in days, she laughed again. Not politely, not guardedly, just freely. We stood there in the muted glow of the office lights, rain painting silver streaks across the windows. She reached up absently, brushing a strand of wet hair behind her ear. Maybe, she said finally, her voice gentler now, you could tell me more over coffee sometime. It wasn't a confession, not quite, but it was a door, one she hadn't closed this time. Outside, thunder murmured again, distant and fading. Inside, everything felt a little warmer. And for the first time in a long time, so did she. The following week felt lighter, though neither of us said why. Something in the air had changed, not loud enough for anyone else to notice, but I felt it in the way she smiled when I passed her desk, in the small pauses between words that carried a kind of quiet understanding. She wasn't avoiding me anymore. Instead, she seemed to let herself slow down around me, as if she no longer needed to fill every silence with purpose. One evening, the office began to empty again, that familiar hush settling over the space. I was gathering my things when her door opened. Still here? She asked, that soft smile in her voice. I shrugged. Habit, I guess. She tilted her head. You could break it. Maybe with coffee. The words were casual, but the glance she gave me wasn't. It carried a mix of hesitation and hope, like she was giving me a chance to step closer or turn away. I'd like that, I said simply. We didn't rush to leave. Instead, she finished what she was doing while I waited near her desk, the air between us calm and unhurried. The city outside was washed in the amber glow of streetlights, the rain now replaced by a clear, cool night. As we walked down the quiet hallway toward the elevator, our reflections moved side by side in the darkened glass. Two people who looked the same as yesterday, but somehow weren't anymore. When the doors slid open, she stepped inside first. The hum of the elevator filled the silence. She pressed the button for the ground floor, then leaned lightly against the wall, her eyes finding mine. You make this place feel different, she said after a moment. Less like a job. More like... She stopped herself, searching for the right word. Human, I offered. She smiled, almost shyly. Exactly. We both laughed softly. The sound echoed faintly in the small space, and something inside me steadied, that fragile balance between admiration and affection finding its rhythm. When the doors opened, a rush of night air met us. The city felt awake, though quieter now. Headlights gliding by, the scent of wet pavement still lingering from the storm. There was a small cafe across the street, its windows fogged slightly from the warmth inside. Without needing to discuss it, we headed there. The place was nearly empty. A few late stragglers murmured over laptops, the hum of an espresso machine filling the pauses. We chose a small table near the window. For the first time, I saw her outside the world we shared. No office light, no expectations, just her. She looked younger somehow, or maybe just freer. She stirred her coffee slowly, eyes fixed on the swirling surface. It's strange, she said, voice low. How easy it is to feel seen by someone you barely meant to know. I didn't answer right away. I just watched her. The faint curve of her smile, the reflection of streetlights in her eyes. I know what you mean, I said finally. Sometimes the right people just appear at the right time. Her hand rested near mine on the table. Not touching. Just close enough that the warmth of her skin felt like a quiet promise. And in that small, ordinary cafe, I realized it wasn't about age or rules or even timing. It was about how peace can sound like a voice you didn't expect to hear. A week later, we met again. Not by accident this time. She'd sent a short message that morning. Coffee? Simple, unassuming, but enough to make the rest of my day hum with quiet anticipation. By evening, the city had softened into that golden hour where everything glows for just a little too short a time. I arrived early, waiting near the window of the same cafe. The air smelled of roasted beans and rain from earlier that afternoon. When she walked in, she wasn't in her usual office attire. Her hair was loose, brushed over one shoulder, a light sweater in place of her blazer. The sight of her, free of the day's weight, made me smile without meaning to. "Hi," she said, her tone easy but her eyes bright with something unspoken. "Hi," I replied, standing as she joined me. For a few minutes we just talked about ordinary things, work, the weather, the new intern who couldn't figure out the printer. It felt good to laugh again, to share small pieces of the world without pretending they didn't matter. At some point, she leaned back, stirring her drink, and said softly, "I've been thinking about that night, the one when it rained." I looked at her, waiting. "I was afraid I'd blurred a line I shouldn't have," she continued. "But I also realized that maybe I was afraid of how right it felt, and that scared me more." Her honesty hit me quietly, the way soft truths always do. I reached across the table, not to take her hand, but to rest mine nearby, an invitation rather than a move. She hesitated for only a breath before letting her fingers brush mine. The touch was simple, grounding. No spark or dramatics. Just warmth, calm and steady, like two people who finally stopped pretending. "I don't want this to be complicated," I said. "I just want it to be real." Her smile was small but sure. "Real sounds good." Outside, the evening deepened. People passed by the window, some laughing, some rushing home, all unaware of the quiet shift happening between us. Inside, time seemed to slow, not stopping but stretching just enough for everything to feel possible. We sat there long after our cups had gone cold, trading stories that didn't need to impress anyone. She told me about the years she'd spent trying to hold everything together, the job, the expectations, the version of herself everyone depended on. I told her how I'd been chasing purpose without knowing what it really looked like. Somewhere between those stories, something tender and new settled in the silence. When we finally stood to leave, she slipped her arm through mine, not shyly, not as a question, but as if it had always belonged there. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, bathing the wet pavement in gold. She tilted her head slightly toward me and said, half smiling, "You know, staying late that night might have been the best accident I've had in years." I laughed quietly. "Then I guess I'm glad I didn't finish that report." We walked together into the soft noise of the city. No grand gestures, no promises, just an easy closeness that felt like the start of something honest. And for the first time in a long time, the night didn't feel empty. Felt like home. We walked together into the soft noise of the city. No grand gestures, no promises, just an easy closeness that felt like the start of something honest. And for the first time in a long time, the night didn't feel empty. Felt like home. Beat, soft pause. If the story stayed with you. If you've ever felt that quiet pull toward someone you weren't expecting. Take a moment, breathe it in. And if you'd like more stories like this, about quiet moments, second chances, and unexpected connections, subscribe, leave a comment, and let me know what part of this one lingered with you. Because sometimes, all it takes is a small moment, one shared night, one unplanned conversation, to change everything.